even now, years later, the first thing I remember is the sound, deep, almost subsonic, something you feel before you hear. The hotel conference room hummed with that frequency, the low and constant rumble of industrial HVAC mingling with the crisp click of boots and the distant echo of someone's laughter, forced, masculine, made for an audience. My hands were flat on the cool laminate table, fingers splayed, not moving. All around me, the glow of fluorescent panels overhead, the dull gleam of a whiteboard covered in code words, the blank faces of 10 men and women in black polos, their unit insignia stitched small over left breasts. The smell in the air, burnt coffee, paper, and a faint metallic tang that clung to us like a secret. Across the table, Jason Maddox was speaking, but not to me. The words didn't reach me, not really. My mind, even then, was somewhere behind my eyes, cataloging, absorbing, bracing. We all wore the same badge lanyards, the ones that led us through doors others never saw. But only one of us was about to be erased. I could feel it, the way you sense rain in the bones of an old wound. Maddox's voice measured, joking, then suddenly cold. The room shifting, just a degree, as if everyone else knew the script but me. My name is Rowan Kerr. I am 37 years old. I worked, for a defense contractor that doesn't exist on paper, a place where job titles are skin you shed at the door. I'm non-binary, though in the world that shaped me, that fact is a secret kept close. This is the story of how the shadows I worked in turned on me, and how everything I trusted about my loyalty, my team, and my purpose was twisted into a weapon against me. I tell it not because it is easy, but because silence would mean they won. I spent more than a decade living inside classified corridors and gray spaces, the kind of places where every window is triple glazed and every conversation has a subtext. Most days, my work was data, threat modeling, red teaming facility defenses, running simulated breaches against our own clients to expose what they didn't want to see. There's a certain rhythm to those lives, a comfort in the rules, never written down, always enforced. You get used to small rooms, coded language, and the constant hum of suppressed anxiety. Before things turned, that rhythm was my anchor. I'd come home late to my apartment, a second-floor walk-up in Arlington, where the only light was the sodium glow of the street lamps and the only sound was the muted chatter of the TV left on for company. My friends were other ghosts, analysts, logistics officers, the odd NSA attaché who'd share a beer and a silence. We talked about nothing. We talked about everything but what mattered. My parents, retired Air Force, didn't ask questions about my paychecks. They trusted I was serving something larger than myself, and I let them believe it. I suppose I should tell you what mattered to me, then. I cared about doing work that counted, work that, at its best, saved lives, even if no one would ever know. I believed the ugly things we were asked to do had a purpose. I believed the people I worked with, for all their armor and bravado, shared that purpose. I believed, most of all, that if I played by the rules, the system would protect me. There were warning signs, if I'm honest. Little things, Maddox shifting the schedule on a Friday night with no explanation, an odd question from HR about an unauthorized data transfer that had nothing to do with my access. The security team's sudden friendliness, which felt less like camaraderie and more like surveillance. But in our world, paranoia was part of the uniform. You learn to let it ride, to trust the chain of command, to do your job. The job, that spring, was an audit. Our client, a shadowy little piece of the Department of Homeland Security, wanted to know if their contractors, us, were leak-proof. Maddox led the team, as always, his charm loudest when he was hiding something. "We're just stress testing the system," he'd said, clapping my shoulder. "No one's targeting you, Kerr." But the way his eyes slid away from mine told another story. I threw myself into the work. It was easier than asking questions about what felt off. We mapped network topologies, spoofed employee badges, ran penetration tests so subtle even the real attackers would have missed them. My team was good, too good, sometimes, at making problems disappear. I trusted them with my life, and more dangerously, with my reputation. The day the contract closed, Maddox called a debrief at a hotel near the Potomac, the kind of place that does steady business with agencies that don't officially exist. I arrived early, as always, the smell of chlorine from the lobby pool overlaying my nerves. Everyone was there, except Maddox, who slipped in at the last minute, flanked by two men in civilian suits I didn't know. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a script. Maddox announced there'd been a breach. Someone on our team had exfiltrated sensitive data to an unknown server. The room shifted, faces tense, eyes on me. One of the suits, a man with a thin mustache and bored eyes, produced a folder. Inside, timestamps, logs, technical gibberish that, at a glance, could be made to say anything. I felt time slow, my body cold, my breath shallow. Maddox's voice was smooth, almost apologetic. "Rowan, you're the only one with access at those hours. We all want this cleared up quickly." The others watched, silent, their faces unreadable. A part of me wanted to protest, to shout, but years of training kept me still. They asked me questions, pointed, rehearsed, already convinced of the answer. Someone took my badge. Someone else led me out of the room. The corridor was empty. I saw my reflection in the mirrored glass, blank, small, erased. They told me to wait for a call, that legal would be in touch. No one offered a handshake. I drove home in a blur, my hands trembling on the wheel. My phone buzzed, an email, then another. My access was revoked, my company laptop locked. My personal devices pinged with two-factor alerts I hadn't triggered. I sat on the edge of my unmade bed, the night outside pressing close. 3 days passed. No call came. My team didn't answer texts. Maddox vanished. HR sent a terse message, pending investigation, please refrain from contact with current employees. The silence was louder than any accusation. I tried to sleep but found only the flicker of old memories, training exercises, late-night briefings, the easy camaraderie of people who lived on the edge of a secret. The sense of violation grew, not from the accusation itself, but from the way the world closed in around me, brick by brick. My bank sent a fraud alert, my rent was suddenly late, my insurance under review. I was becoming untouchable, radioactive. I tried to call my parents. My mother's voice was wary, news had reached them, in some official-sounding form. She said, just tell us the truth, Rowan, and I realized they, too, were being kept at arm's length. In the weeks that followed, my isolation became a kind of experiment. Would anyone stand by me? My old NSA friend, Danny, answered one call, voice tight with caution. They said you breached a codeword project, Rowan. I can't risk talking more. Even my therapist, bound by secrecy and ethics, suggested a pause in our sessions until the situation clarifies. The world retreated from me, inch by inch. Meanwhile, the rumors spread, as rumors do in small, paranoid worlds. I was painted as a rogue, a burnout, someone whose dedication had curdled into recklessness. LinkedIn blocked my account. Recruiters who'd once pursued me stopped returning emails. Someone, probably Maddox, had started a whisper campaign. Kerr always was a little unstable. You know how those people are. I spent my days tracing what I could, VPN logs, metadata, the fragments of my own digital shadow. It became clear, painfully so, that the breach had been constructed. The access logs could have been faked, the exfiltration could have been staged by anyone with the right admin keys. But proving that, from the outside, was impossible. The evidence, in their hands, would never see daylight. Bills mounted. My savings, which I thought secure, bled away, my accounts under review, funds frozen pending investigation. I sold my car, then my furniture. The apartment shrank as the world did, until all that remained were boxes and the echo of old loyalties. I thought, at first, that time might save me. That the truth would eventually surface, that someone, anyone, would see the pattern. But the system that had once felt like home now flexed against me, its hidden muscles working to erase me from its memory. It was in that darkness, 2 months after my erasure, that I solved the puzzle. Not with brilliance, but with exhaustion. I was reviewing old work files, archived in an encrypted backup they hadn't touched. There, buried in a project directory, was an internal report I'd written 6 months earlier, a warning about a vulnerability in the client's secure file transfer protocol. The report was flagged, signed by me and Maddox. But Maddox had added a private note, one I'd never seen before. Potential exploit for demonstration, coordinate with ops. The timestamp predated the breach by weeks. It was evidence, not of my guilt, but of Maddox's intent to use the exploit for a live-fire demonstration, likely with the client's covert blessing. I realized, with a kind of sick clarity, that the breach had been orchestrated. They needed a scapegoat to close the contract, to prove the system worked. Maddox had set me up, knew I would be the expendable one, the one with the fewest connections, the one no one would defend. The question became, how do you fight a shadow with no name? How do you expose a betrayal written in the language of plausible deniability? I spent days planning, not in anger, but in cold, methodical determination. If I moved against them publicly, they'd bury me deeper. If I tried to plead my case to the client, I'd be stonewalled. But if I could turn their own obsession with secrecy against them, if I could show, quietly and irrefutably, that the real threat was inside their walls, they might be forced to act. I started with the report, scrubbing metadata, cross-referencing the chain of edits. I found a handful of anomalies, VPN connections traced not to my device, but to a shell laptop that had never been assigned, logged in under my credentials at odd hours. I mapped the connections, triangulated IPs, pieced together a timeline that showed, at the very least, administrative tampering. I compiled every artifact, every log, every innocuous email chain that hinted at collusion. Next came the hard part, finding someone who would listen. The client's official channels were closed to me, but there was an oversight office, chartered to handle contractor misconduct, largely toothless, but with one virtue: they hated embarrassment. I drafted a report, careful, factual, devoid of emotion. I included my entire evidence tree, cross-referenced with public records, and crucially, never accused Maddox by name. I simply laid out the facts. I sent it, using a secure Dropbox intended for whistleblowers, knowing it would take weeks to be reviewed. Then I waited. Time passed. My life, such as it was, became quieter still. I took a temp job stocking shelves at a pharmacy, grateful for the anonymity. My phone was silent for days at a time. I stopped checking my email hourly. 3 weeks later, I received a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was clipped, official, but with just enough warmth to sound human. MX Kerr, this is Inspector Hadley with the DHS Office of Contractor Oversight. We'd like to discuss your report. Can you come in? I arrived at a nondescript federal office, where a security guard checked my bag with the bored efficiency of someone who's seen everything. Hadley met me in the lobby, a woman in her 50s, with kind, tired eyes and the kind of posture that comes from years of listening to bad news. She led me to a small conference room, offered water, and said, "We're familiar with your file. I can't promise you what you want, but we're taking this seriously." She asked questions about the vulnerability, about Maddox, about the timeline. I answered as best I could, careful not to sound bitter, careful to keep my anger from coloring my words. She listened, took notes, and told me, "In the end, you've given us enough to open a formal inquiry. But please understand, these things move slowly. And there may be consequences you can't control." That was the truth of it. In our world, no one wins cleanly. But at least I'd forced them to look. The investigation, such as it was, unspoled over 6 months. I wasn't privy to the details, but small signals reached me, a politely worded request for a follow-up interview, a notification that my security clearance was under review, not revoked. I heard, through back channels, that Maddox had been reassigned, then quietly placed on administrative leave. My old team was split up, reassigned to different contracts. Eventually, I received a letter, plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single page, the Office of Contractor Oversight has concluded its inquiry. While we cannot comment on specific personnel actions, we thank you for your diligence and recommend that you seek legal counsel regarding your employment status. No apology, no admission. But the investigation had left a mark. I learned that DHS had placed a moratorium on renewals for my former company, pending a broader audit. Maddox's name was quietly removed from proposal documents. Revenge, as I'd imagined it, was never about public vindication. There were no headlines, no dramatic confrontations. But the silence changed character, less punitive, more uncertain. I began to receive emails from recruiters again, cautious but polite. A colleague from another contract reached out, offering a freelance role, nothing glamorous, but honest work. It was not enough to undo the harm. My reputation was changed, scarred, but no longer erased. I found a kind of peace, not in justice, but in the simple fact that I had not disappeared. The system that had tried to make me a ghost was, at least for a moment, forced to acknowledge my existence. I moved to a smaller apartment, cheaper, quieter, farther from the old corridors. I called my parents, explained as much as I could. My mother cried, my father said he was proud, in the awkward way of men who love in silence. I began, slowly, to build something new, a life not defined by badge access or clearance levels, but by the mundane rhythms of ordinary work. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the events in my mind, the burn of betrayal, the cold satisfaction of pushing back. I wonder if Maddox thinks of me, if he feels any regret. I doubt it. In his world, casualties are a cost of doing business. But I survived. I refused to be their scapegoat, their vanished lesson. I reclaimed my name, if nothing else. And when I close my eyes now, the ringing in my ears is softer. The shadows are still there, but they do not own me. Not anymore.